Derek Holloway never feared the dark until the night it started humming back at him. That single sentence sets the tone immediately, suspenseful, character-focused, and charged with mystery. It introduces Derek by name, hints at danger tied to electricity, and pulls the viewer straight into the tension of the story. The town of Marlow Ridge always seemed peaceful after dark, the kind of place where the loudest sound was the rustling of leaves or the distant hum of street lights. But on one particular night, that calm was about to be disturbed by a man who had grown far too comfortable living in the shadows. His name was Derek Holloway, a 36-year-old drifter whose life had been a long string of bad decisions. He wasn't an evil man, just someone who always took the easiest road, even when it led straight downhill. Derek had been in trouble most of his life, shoplifting as a teenager, breaking into garages as a young adult, and doing small-time jobs for whoever would pay in cash. He was clever enough to get by, but never smart enough to stop. When money ran low, he always found some excuse to steal again, telling himself it was just one more job, one more quick grab before things got better. But they never did. That night, he parked his rusted pickup truck a few streets away from his target. He had spent the week watching the property from a distance, learning the habits of the old man who lived there. Earl Whitman was a retired electrician, well-respected in town, known for fixing power issues in half the county before he grew too old to climb ladders. Rumor had it that he still kept a workshop full of tools, copper wiring, and old electrical parts that could be sold for a decent profit. Derek saw it as the perfect score. He moved through the darkness like a shadow, wearing an old black hoodie and gloves. The moonlight bounced off the shiny metal of a crowbar he kept tucked under his arm. He had learned from past mistakes no more smashing windows or making noise. This time, he would be quick and quiet. When he reached the edge of Earl's property, he crouched near the fence and waited. The house lights were off and the windows were dark. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, but it didn't sound close enough to matter. Derek's eyes fixed on the small workshop behind the house. Its roof sagged slightly, and the paint had peeled away, but the lock on the door gleamed under the moonlight. He took that as a good sign. New lock meant something worth protecting. He slipped through a gap in the fence, careful not to make a sound. His heart pounded harder the closer he got. The night air was cool, but sweat ran down his back. He reached the workshop door and knelt to examine the lock. It was newer than he expected, but not strong enough to stop him. After a few quick twists with a screwdriver and a soft grunt, the latch gave way with a metallic snap. The sound echoed in the still air, and Derek froze, listening. Nothing moved, no lights came on. He pushed the door open. A musty smell hit him, first dust, oil, and something sharp, like burnt metal. His flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing shelves full of coiled wire, toolboxes, and machines that looked older than he was. His pulse quickened. He had struck gold. As he stepped inside, the beam of light caught a sign on the far wall. The letters were faded, but he could still make them out. Danger, high voltage. Derek chuckled under his breath. He thought it was just another old warning left over from Earl's working days. He didn't realize, as he crossed the threshold and shut the door behind him, that this night was going to teach him the harshest lesson of his life, one that no thief ever wanted to learn. Inside the workshop, the air felt heavy and stale, carrying the faint metallic scent of old wires and grease. Dust floated in the beam of Derek's flashlight like tiny golden sparks, drifting lazily through the dark. The space was bigger than he expected, with long wooden tables covered in tangled cords, cracked light bulbs, and rusty switches. Every inch of the walls was cluttered with something: spools of wire, tool racks, circuit boards, even glass jars filled with strange metal parts. It looked less like a workshop and more like a museum of forgotten inventions. Derek set his bag down and started to work quickly. He knew time was his enemy. If the old man had any security cameras, they might already be recording. He picked up a thick roll of copper wire, heavy and cold to the touch. Copper was money in his eyes, and there was plenty of it here. He began coiling the wires neatly into his bag, smiling to himself. This was going to be easier than he thought. Every time he turned his flashlight, the shadows seemed to shift along the walls, stretching and bending as if the room were alive. In one corner, a row of dusty control panels caught his eye. They looked newer than the rest of the equipment, their switches clean and labels still legible. He took a few steps closer and ran his hand along the cold metal surface. There was a faint hum beneath his fingers, almost like a quiet vibration. It made him pause. He brushed it off, assuming it was just the wind pushing through a loose vent. A small red light blinked near one of the panels. He squinted at it but didn't think much of it. Some kind of old power indicator, he assumed. Still, something about it felt strange. The workshop was supposed to be empty and unused, yet there were signs of recent activity: a half-drunk cup of coffee on the shelf, a toolbox that looked freshly opened, a set of pliers lying across the floor as if someone had dropped them mid-task. He continued stuffing his bag until it grew heavy. His gloves were streaked with grime, and the air felt warmer now. He moved toward a shelf in the back where he spotted something that looked like a small safe. His excitement grew. If he could pry it open, maybe he'd find cash or something valuable inside. He knelt and tugged at it, but it was bolted to the table. Frustrated, he wiped sweat from his forehead and turned to find another way. That's when he noticed a thick cable running from the safe's base along the floor to the wall. It wasn't like the others, it was clean, tightly fastened, and humming faintly. He crouched beside it and traced it to a large switchboard covered in dials and meters. Above it, a small electronic timer flashed the numbers 11:56. He leaned in closer, curious, the faint buzzing growing louder. The sound was rhythmic, almost pulsing. His flashlight flickered once, then again, and the timer ticked down another second. He didn't understand what it was, but it didn't feel right. Still, greed pushed him forward. He tugged gently at the cable, thinking he could pull it free for more copper. It didn't budge. Then came a faint click somewhere deep in the walls. A low hum rose, vibrating through the floorboards beneath his boots. The timer blinked again, steady and cold. Derek felt a twinge of unease but shook it off. Whatever system Earl had installed, it couldn't possibly be live after all these years. He picked up his crowbar and moved toward the switchboard, completely unaware that in just a few minutes the entire workshop would wake up and he would be standing right in the middle of it. The first thing Derek noticed was the change in the air. It grew thicker, charged, as if the room itself had started breathing. He turned his head, listening. The silence that had filled the workshop minutes ago was gone, replaced by a low hum that seemed to come from every corner. He froze, the crowbar still in his hand, unsure if it was his imagination or something real. The hum deepened, steady and menacing, and then, without warning, the entire workshop came alive. Fluorescent lights blinked on overhead, blinding him for a moment. Machines rattled, fans spun, and somewhere behind him a motor whirred into motion. Derek stumbled backward, shielding his eyes. The sound was deafening. Sparks popped from a circuit box near the far wall, showering the floor with tiny bursts of light. His heart slammed in his chest as he tried to make sense of what was happening. The workshop had been dead moments ago, yet now it felt like it was waking from a long sleep. He took a step toward the door, but something made him stop. The switchboard that had been quiet moments earlier now glowed with pale blue light. The timer blinked rapidly, its red numbers counting down in uneven jumps. He didn't know what it meant, but instinct screamed at him to get out. He turned and ran toward the exit, but his foot caught on a loop of wire lying across the floor. He stumbled, catching himself on a metal workbench to keep from falling. That was when he felt a sudden, sharp jolt that raced up his arm and into his chest. The pain was instant and blinding. His body stiffened, muscles locking as if every nerve had been lit on fire. A flash of white filled his vision, followed by darkness edged with red. He fell backward, the crowbar clattering to the floor beside him. For a few seconds, he couldn't move. The metallic taste of blood filled his mouth, and his breath came in short, ragged gasps. His hand twitched uncontrollably. When the shock passed, he forced himself to his knees, panting, his entire body trembling. The smell of burnt rubber filled the air, and a thin wisp of smoke rose from his glove. His flashlight rolled away, its beam landing on the wall where the words "high voltage" were stenciled in faded yellow. He stared at them, realizing for the first time that maybe the sign wasn't as harmless as he thought. He grabbed his bag and tried again for the door. The wooden frame creaked, refusing to open. Panic clawed at him. He slammed his shoulder against it, once, twice, until finally it gave way. The cold night air hit his face, and he stumbled outside, gasping like a drowning man finally breaking the surface. Behind him, the workshop groaned and hissed. The lights flickered violently, throwing wild shadows across the yard. Something inside sparked again, sending a small burst of flame up toward the ceiling. Derek didn't stop to look. He ran, clutching his burned arm against his chest, his breath ragged and uneven. The hum of electricity seemed to follow him down the dirt path, growing fainter only when he reached the street. He didn't know how long he'd been running before he saw his truck. His hands shook as he tried to open the door, leaving black smudges on the handle. His heartbeat felt strange, uneven, as if something inside him was still vibrating. He slumped into the driver's seat, eyes wide and unfocused, trying to convince himself it was over. The lights of the workshop glowed faintly in the distance behind him, a silent reminder that he had escaped by luck alone. But as the pain spread through his arm and chest, Derek began to wonder if that electricity had followed him, if part of it was still inside him, waiting to strike again. By the time morning came, the small town of Marlow Ridge was already buzzing with rumors. A faint column of smoke had been seen rising from the old Whitman property just before dawn, and the smell of something burnt lingered in the cool air. When the police arrived, they found the workshop door splintered open, black scorch marks licking up the walls, and wires melted into the concrete floor. The old warning sign was half torn from the wall, swaying gently in the breeze. It didn't take long for the officers to realize this wasn't a simple fire. Something electrical had gone terribly wrong. Earl Whitman met them at the edge of the property, his expression unreadable. He explained that he hadn't entered the workshop in weeks but had heard strange noises late at night, thumps, clanks, the occasional metallic crash. He assumed it was just the wind or animals getting inside. The sight before him now told a different story. When one of the officers lifted a burnt glove from the floor and found a wallet nearby, the truth began to form. Inside the wallet was an ID with a name familiar to the local police, Derek Holloway. An alert went out immediately. Within hours, officers tracked Derek to a rundown apartment on the edge of town. He answered the door looking pale and disoriented. His right hand was wrapped in a makeshift bandage, the skin beneath dark and blistered. His eyes had a strange, distant look, like he hadn't slept or eaten in days. The officers didn't need to ask many questions. Derek could barely stand. They called for an ambulance before placing him under arrest. At the hospital, doctors worked quickly to treat his injuries. They were puzzled by what they saw. The burns were deep but oddly patterned, as though the electricity had traveled through his body in twisting paths rather than straight lines. Even stranger, Derek's heartbeat was irregular, fluttering wildly every few minutes, then slowing to almost nothing before racing again. Machines around him beeped and flickered unpredictably. Nurses said the lights dimmed every time they touched his monitors. When detectives came to take his statement, they found him trembling, staring at the ceiling as if listening to something only he could hear. He said little, only fragments that didn't make sense. Words like buzzing, the walls, and the timer slipped out between shallow breaths. He claimed the workshop had come alive, that the wires had moved like snakes, that something inside had reached out for him. The detectives exchanged skeptical looks but couldn't ignore the evidence. His burns were real, the damage severe. News spread quickly. People in town whispered that Derek had been cursed, that Earl's workshop was haunted by the energy he had once controlled. Others said it was simple justice that a thief had met the consequences of his own greed. The police saw it as an open and shut case, attempted theft, trespassing, property damage. But the doctors couldn't explain the strange electrical interference that seemed to follow him. When Derek was finally discharged weeks later, he was a different man. The spark in his eyes had faded, replaced by a wary fear of light switches and plugs. Even the hum of a refrigerator made him flinch. The prison transport van came to take him away, and as the door shut, the lights in the hospital hallway flickered one last time. No one said anything, but every person who saw it felt the same cold chill. Whatever had happened in that workshop, it hadn't fully let him go. The county jail was a gray, aging building that hummed faintly at all hours, the kind of place where time seemed to stretch and fold in on itself. Derek Holloway had been there for nearly 2 weeks, waiting for his hearing. The burns on his hands had mostly healed, but the pain still pulsed beneath his skin like a hidden current. The other inmates gave him space. They said strange things happened whenever he was nearby. Lights flickered, radios cut off, electric doors stalled mid-close. Some joked that he was haunted, others avoided him altogether. His cell was small, just a narrow cot, a metal sink, and a single bulb overhead. That bulb had been flickering since the day he arrived. Maintenance had replaced it twice, but each time it started again, the faint tremor of light dancing above his head like a nervous heartbeat. Derek tried not to look at it, but at night, when everything was quiet, the pulsing light seemed to match the rhythm in his chest. It made him restless. It made him remember the hum from that workshop. Sleep came in short bursts. When he did drift off, his dreams were full of light white flashes, tangled wires, the feeling of being trapped inside something humming and alive. Sometimes he woke up gasping, the taste of metal thick in his mouth. Guards who passed by his cell late at night claimed they heard faint static, like a radio tuned between stations, coming from inside. One even swore he saw sparks dance across the metal bars. No one could explain it, and the warden dismissed it as imagination, but the tension in the cell block grew each night Derek was there. On the evening of the 12th day, a thunderstorm rolled over Marlow Ridge. The rain came hard, hammering against the windows, the sky flashing every few seconds. The jail's power flickered once, twice, then steadied again. Derek sat on the edge of his cot, staring at the floor. The hum had returned, faint but constant, crawling up through his feet and into his bones. He pressed his hands against his ears, but it didn't help. It was inside him now. The guard on duty walked the corridor, checking each cell. When he reached Derek's, he slowed. The prisoner was sitting perfectly still, his head bowed, the flickering bulb above him casting sharp shadows on the walls. The guard made a note to call maintenance again. As he turned away, a sound cut through the hallway, a deep crack followed by a brief surge of light. The entire block went dark. When power returned moments later, Derek was lying on the floor beside the cot. His face was calm, almost peaceful. There were no signs of struggle, no burns on the outside, but the smell of ozone hung heavy in the air. The bulb above him had shattered, glass scattered like glitter across the floor. The coroner later said the cause of death was heart failure brought on by electrical complications from his earlier injuries. Yet no one could explain the charred outline found beneath him on the concrete, faint but unmistakable, like the shape of branching lightning frozen in place. In the days that followed, strange reports came from the jail lights that dimmed for no reason, a low buzz that echoed faintly through the hallways. Even when the cell was cleaned and repainted, no one wanted to use it again. The number on Derek Holloway's door was quietly removed. In Marlow Ridge, his story spread like a cautionary whisper. People said the electricity that had burned him never really let him go. Some believed that when the thunder rolled over town and the lights flickered in their homes, it was Derek's restless energy moving through the wires, a reminder of the night he tried to steal something far more powerful than he could ever understand.